In this part, we'll finally leave the confines of the login form and move to the simpler forms of social login and the Country Picker UI. I'll start with the social login mockup, since it's so small and simple. This is the form you see when you choose the social login option. I cropped the bottom as it's just white. This is a pretty trivial UI. There isn't that much to say about this form. It's trivial. We use two icons for Facebook and Google and define the back arrow. Thanks to all the theming work we did up to this point, everything just works and looks like the Uber app. We do need to define the flag button though, as it's a UI ID that I reused in several forms. It got the name from the CountryPickerForm, which we'll go into next. The flag button is just a label in terms of padding, etc. It has a subtly larger font at 3.2 millimeters, not much larger. The CountryPickerForm lists the countries next to their flags. The first letter of the country name is highlighted between the countries, and when you scroll down, the title area collapses to make more room. It does that with a smooth animation effect. Speaking of the title area, it's white on black instead of black on white. We reach this form when we click the Country Picker button, but that only happens in the phone number entry form, which we will discuss shortly. Let's jump right into the code. Predictably, the form is a box layout container on the y-axis. The initBlackTitleForm method is a static method in a common utility class. We'll cover it soon. We don't have flags for all the countries, so we need a blank space icon so the elements align. Here we loop over all the country codes and create a button with the flag letter UI ID for every entry. We also need to implement the alphabet letter headers. Every time the first character of a country changes, we add a label representing the entry. When an entry is selected, we update the text and icon of the country code picker button that launched this form. We need to override the toolbar initialization so we can set the proper BlackToolbar UI ID. Speaking of the BlackToolbar, it is predictably styled as black and opaque. We have a 1mm padding, which doesn't exist in the default toolbar. It's helpful for the collapse animation effect, so padding still remains. The margin is 0 as usual. Flags letter is the letter that appears on top of every letter change between country names. The colors and the opacity are things I picked from the screenshot image. The other aspects of this UI are derived from label. The form with the black title requires some work, which should be more generic, as a black title area is used in several places within the Uber application. For this purpose, we have the common code class, which stores common static code in the application. This is a non-trivial task, as the logic needs to support animated collapse of the title area as the user scrolls down. The method accepts a callback for the case of a search operation. This isn't implemented yet, but if it's null, a search icon isn't added. We add the back command as a button, which allows us to place it above the title in a custom way and animate the position. We can't use the title command UI ID as is, since it uses a black on white scheme in other forms. I could have used a different UI ID here. If we have a search callback, I build the layout that includes the search button, otherwise I create a layout without it. I place the title on top of the back button container using a layered layout. It doesn't seem to be on top because I've set the top margin so it resides below the black arrow icon. I did this so I can animate the position of the label fluidly by changing the margin value. This one line allows the title to collapse into place next to the arrow. It translates the style of the title, which currently has a large top margin, to one without top margin and with side margin. This means that the change in the style causes the title to move next to the back arrow. Cover transition is used in the BlackTitleForm on iOS. Notice that cover transitions expect in and out values for cover and uncover. The white on black title is a white title style, and as the name suggests, it has white foreground and a transparent background, as the black portion comes from the BlackToolbar UI ID. The padding is pretty standard. These numbers were picked to align properly with the commands both in expanded and collapsed states. The margin is actually 0, as we changed this manually in code. It might make sense to do the margin here for some cases. The font is standard light font, but 4mm in size, which should appear bigger, but not huge. Subtle. The left margin version of the style does define the side margin to leave room for the arrow. This means that the collapse animation will mutate into this UI ID, which has no top margin, so it will effectively align with the back arrow. However, the left margin will keep it from going on top of the arrow. It also evens out the padding so things look more aligned now that they are on the same row. We derive the white on black title UI ID so the settings we don't override are identical. The font is the same but a smaller 3mm size. This will also animate as the title slides into place. It's subtle but noticeable.